Have you ever met someone who was completely certain about something only for it to turn out spectacularly wrong? The wild part is that this isn't rare or unusual. It happens everywhere in arguments, at work, in relationships, in group chats, and yes, even when we talk to ourselves. The truth is that confidence and correctness are not best friends, they barely even hang out. Today, we're talking about why people can be absolutely sure about things that are absolutely wrong. And more importantly, how this strange human habit is wired into our biology, our psychology, our memories, our emotional lives, and even our culture. The goal here isn't to roast anyone, because the real twist is that all of us, every single one of us, fall into these traps. The brain has its own shortcuts and reward systems that make confidence feel good and uncertainty feel painful, and that's where this whole story begins. Let's start with something surprising. The human brain loves certainty even more than it loves accuracy. It sounds odd at first, but it makes sense once you look at what's happening under the hood. When something feels certain to us, the brain releases a tiny reward, a little chemical signal that says, yep, this is solid, you're doing great, keep going. It doesn't check whether we're actually right, it only cares about the feeling of being right. On the other hand, uncertainty activates the brain's threat system. When we're unsure about something, our mind starts searching for danger, even if nothing is actually wrong. It's the same machinery that kept our ancestors alive, just applied to modern situations. So when a person digs their heels in during an argument, insisting they're right even when they're not, part of what you're seeing is their brain desperately avoiding the discomfort of uncertainty. Evolution shaped this instinct even further. Think about a small group of early humans making decisions. The bold, confident individual often got more status, more trust, and sometimes better outcomes, even if they weren't always right. A leader who hesitated constantly wasn't useful. A hunter who second-guessed every decision wouldn't bring back food. Confidence, even misplaced confidence, helped the group survive. And so those traits were reinforced. Over time, projecting certainty became a built-in survival strategy. And that ancient strategy still runs today, just in situations where it doesn't always make sense. Being confidently wrong doesn't help us hunt mammoths anymore, but the instinct hasn't gone anywhere. It shows up in meetings, in comment sections, and even during holiday dinners when someone starts explaining how phones actually work as if they personally coded them. One of the biggest pieces of this puzzle is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It describes how people with low skill in a given area tend to overestimate their ability, not because they're arrogant, but because they lack the knowledge needed to see their own mistakes. In other words, they don't know enough to know they don't know enough. It's like trying to fix a pipe once and suddenly feeling like a master plumber. You can walk away thinking, nailed it, even though a real expert would take one look and say, that's going to explode. This effect shows up across all kinds of areas: logic, grammar, finance, cooking, driving, even humor. And here's the part people don't always realize: the effect applies to everyone. Being smart doesn't prevent it, being educated doesn't prevent it. We're all blind to our blind spots in areas where we lack experience. But the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't acting alone. It has a partner in crime: confirmation bias. This is the brain's habit of seeking out information that agrees with us and ignoring information that challenges us. It's our mind taking a shortcut. Instead of doing the hard work of examining both sides, it just sorts the world into two piles: things that support what we believe and things that don't count. This bias is one of the main reasons debates feel so frustrating. Two people can look at the same information and walk away with totally different conclusions, because each person is filtering the data in a way that protects their existing belief. And it happens instantly, automatically, and without conscious intention. Our brains like consistency, and they avoid anything that threatens that consistency. Now, let's talk about a tricky thing: memory. People often think of memory as a recording, a clean little archive of everything we've experienced. But that's not how memory works at all. Memory is reconstructive. It's constantly reshaped by new information, assumptions, emotions, and beliefs. Every time we recall something, we're not replaying it, we're rebuilding it. This creates situations where people are absolutely confident about a memory that's partially or completely wrong. You can have two family members describe the same childhood event with total certainty, but their stories don't match. It's not because anyone is lying. The brain is simply editing the details in a way that feels logical and consistent. In other words, the confidence is real, even if the memory isn't. Another mental glitch that boosts false confidence is anchoring. This is when the first piece of information we hear becomes the foundation for everything that follows. If the initial impression is inaccurate, everything built on top of it will be inaccurate too, but it will still feel completely right. Anchoring shows up when someone hears a rumor about a person and then interprets all future information through that lens. It shows up in pricing, where the first number you see affects what you think is reasonable. And it shows up in debates, where someone forms a first opinion and then sticks to it even when better evidence appears. But confidence doesn't come only from cognitive shortcuts. It also comes from emotion. Strong feelings can create a powerful illusion of certainty. When something feels true, the brain treats that feeling as evidence. This is why arguments fueled by emotion escalate so quickly. The person isn't just defending an opinion, they're defending a feeling that feels deeply and undeniably correct. And here's something important. Being intelligent doesn't protect people from any of this. If anything, smart people can be confidently wrong in more sophisticated ways. They're better at building arguments, better at rationalizing, and better at convincing themselves that their viewpoint is solid. Intelligence doesn't eliminate bias, it just makes the bias more articulate. So how do we avoid falling into these traps ourselves? There are strategies. Asking questions like, "What evidence would change my mind?" helps interrupt the cycle of confirmation bias. Taking a deliberate pause before forming conclusions gives our analytical mind time to kick in. Being open to the idea that we might be wrong strengthens decision-making rather than weakening it. And exposing ourselves to perspectives outside our usual information bubble helps us see the limits of our certainty. At the end of the day, everyone gets things wrong sometimes. Confidence doesn't make someone foolish, and being corrected doesn't make someone weak. Understanding these mental mechanisms isn't about judging others, it's about improving our own thinking. True intelligence isn't about knowing everything, it's about recognizing when our certainty might be misleading us. Now let's go deeper into one of the most fascinating quirks of the human mind, the illusion of explanatory depth. This is the mental trap where we believe we understand something far more deeply than we actually do. It sounds odd, but it happens constantly. People think they understand how everyday objects work, how processes unfold, or how certain systems operate, until they try explaining them step by step. That's when confidence collapses. There have been experiments where participants were asked how well they understood things like bicycles, toilets, locks, zippers, or even simple mechanical tools. People rated their understanding fairly high. But then they were asked to describe the mechanism in detail. Suddenly, the confidence dropped. Not because they were incapable of learning it, but because they realized their original understanding was more like a vague outline than real knowledge. This is a powerful reminder that confidence isn't a proof of understanding. It's often just a signal of familiarity. When something feels familiar, we mistake that feeling for expertise. Our mind blurs the line between "I've seen this before" and "I fully understand how this works." And the illusion doesn't stop with objects. It shows up in beliefs too. Someone might feel certain about a political idea, a scientific claim, or a historical event, but when they try explaining it precisely, the gaps start appearing. That's where humility becomes a powerful tool. Not humility as in weakness, but humility as in mental clarity. The kind that lets you say, "I think I understand this, but let me double check." Let's talk about social identity, because it plays a massive role in why people cling to wrong ideas with so much confidence. Humans are social creatures. We belong to groups, families, communities, cultures, professions, online spaces, and with each of these groups comes a set of shared beliefs. These beliefs can turn into markers of identity. They become part of how we define ourselves. When a belief becomes part of your identity, being wrong doesn't feel like adjusting a fact. It feels like losing a piece of who you are. This is why disagreements escalate so fast. It's not just logic, it's identity defense. People aren't defending a piece of information, they're defending their belonging, their status, their sense of self. And once identity gets involved, confidence skyrockets. The more emotionally tied a belief is to a person's self-image, the stronger their certainty becomes. Even when the facts don't support it, even when the evidence is thin, even when they privately suspect they might be off. The fear of losing belonging outweighs the desire for accuracy. Now add echo chambers on top of that. Modern digital platforms make it easy to surround ourselves with people who think exactly the same way we do. The algorithms notice what we like, what we agree with, what we interact with, and they feed us more of it. The result is a kind of belief greenhouse. Ideas grow in one direction without resistance. Confidence grows with them. Someone can be factually wrong but feel incredibly validated because they're surrounded by thousands of people reinforcing the same idea. It doesn't matter whether the idea is scientifically correct, what matters is repetition and agreement. When enough people echo the same claim, the brain interprets that as truth, not because of logic, but because of social proof. And here's something subtle but important. Echo chambers don't always feel like echo chambers. They feel like normal life. When everyone around you believes something, it feels obvious, it feels true. And when someone from outside the bubble disagrees, they seem like the unreasonable one. Confidence becomes armor in those moments. The person doubles down because contradictory information feels like an attack on the entire community they belong to. Let's shift to something more emotional: why being wrong is so difficult for the ego. We all have an internal narrative about who we are, that we're reasonable, intelligent, competent, capable. Being wrong threatens that narrative. It creates a contradiction between "I'm a smart person" and "I made a mistake." That contradiction produces discomfort. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The mind wants to eliminate the discomfort fast, and the simplest way to do that is to reject the new information and stick with the original belief. Confidence becomes a shield that protects the ego. This is why you see people argue passionately even when the evidence is against them. They're not trying to defend a fact, they're trying to defend their identity and preserve their self-worth. The stronger the emotional investment, the stronger the defensive confidence becomes. Now let's address a surprising truth. Smart people are not immune to any of this. In fact, intelligence sometimes works against accuracy. Highly intelligent people can build sophisticated formulated explanations for things they don't fully understand. They can argue persuasively for ideas that their brain hasn't properly evaluated. They can rationalize mistakes faster and more convincingly. Intelligence reduces the odds of being wrong about certain topics, but it doesn't reduce the emotional or cognitive mechanisms that produce confidence. So the question becomes, what can we actually do about all this? How do we stay aware of our blind spots while still making decisions confidently? It starts with a simple skill: metacognition. Thinking about your own thinking. Asking yourself questions like, why do I believe this? Or how do I know this is true? Or could I explain this clearly if I had to? These questions slow the automatic processes and bring clarity. Another powerful habit is seeking disconfirming evidence. Instead of looking for things that agree with our viewpoint, we deliberately search for things that could prove us wrong. It's uncomfortable at first, but it strengthens mental resilience. People who regularly ask, "What evidence would change my mind?" tend to make better decisions and hold more balanced views. Humility also plays a huge role here. Real humility doesn't mean doubting yourself constantly. It means acknowledging that the world is complex, that mistakes are normal, and that being wrong doesn't reduce your value. Humility turns learning into a strength instead of a threat. It opens the door to new information rather than shutting it out. Exposure to different perspectives helps as well. When you interact with people outside your usual circle, you start seeing how differently others think. This weakens the illusion that your own viewpoint is the universal one. It introduces nuance, it shows the limits of your certainty, and it teaches you that confidence should be calibrated, not inflated. And finally, slowing down matters. A lot of confident mistakes come from quick judgments. When we pause and let our analytical mind catch up, we make fewer knee-jerk errors. Taking a moment to say, "Let me think this through," is one of the simplest tools for accuracy. Understanding why people are confidently wrong isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding the systems inside our own minds, systems that evolved to keep us alive, not to keep us accurate. systems that reward feeling right even when we aren't. And the more we understand those systems, the better we become at navigating them. There's another piece to this puzzle that often gets overlooked: cognitive ease. The brain prefers information that feels easy to process, and it prefers explanations that feel simple, even when the truth is more complicated. When something feels easy, the brain interprets that ease as a sign that it must be true. When something feels difficult, the brain becomes suspicious. This creates a bias toward oversimplified explanations, which are easier to be confidently wrong about. Think about a topic that experts spend decades studying. The subject is usually layered, full of nuance, and loaded with variables. But someone outside that field might hear a single explanation that makes sense at a surface level and instantly feel confident that they understand the entire thing. The ease of the explanation creates a feeling of certainty. The harder, more complex explanation creates discomfort, even if it's closer to the truth. This is why simplistic claims spread faster than accurate ones. The brain rewards simplicity with a sense of clarity, and clarity feels like correctness. That feeling becomes confidence, even when the underlying idea isn't actually solid. Another element that feeds false confidence is the mismatch between the speed of our intuition and the speed of analytical reasoning. Intuition is fast. It fires instantly. It gives us a quick sense of knowing, a gut feeling. Analytical reasoning, the slower and more deliberate process, takes more time and effort. Our brain often mistakes the speed of intuition for accuracy. So when a thought pops into our head quickly, it carries a sense of truth. When a thought requires effort, we feel more hesitant. This is why first impressions are so powerful, and why people stick to their original interpretations even after new information emerges. The initial intuitive judgment simply feels more reliable because it arrived with that immediate burst of certainty. Now let's shift to something we don't like discussing openly: the social rewards of confidence. In many environments, confidence is treated as competence. People who speak with certainty are more likely to be listened to, respected, and followed, even when they're wrong. This isn't just social behavior, it's part of human psychology. We're drawn to people who seem sure of themselves. We assume they know what they're talking about. We take confidence as a clue. This leads to a strange cycle. Someone speaks confidently, people respond positively, the person receives social encouragement, and their confidence grows, even when the original information was shaky. Social feedback reinforces internal certainty. Over time, the person becomes even more committed to the idea because now it's tied not just to belief, but to pride, status, and consistency. This cycle appears everywhere: in workplaces, politics, friendships, online communities, and even in families. The confident voice often becomes the authoritative voice, even without expertise. And once someone is seen as the person who knows, they feel pressure to maintain that image. Admitting uncertainty feels like losing influence, so they double down, they defend, they expand their claims. Confidence hardens into unshakable certainty. But here's something that might sound surprising. This pattern is also part of how group coordination evolved. In group settings, someone has to take charge, someone has to speak first, someone has to project clarity when the situation is confusing. Early humans relied on confident individuals to make decisions quickly, especially in dangerous situations. Overconfidence wasn't just tolerated, it was useful. It kept groups moving forward, even with imperfect information. We're still wired for that system. When someone sounds confident, our brains give them extra credibility. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. The confidence itself becomes persuasive. That's why people can disagree with facts, yet still feel absolutely sure of their position. Their brain is responding not only to the information itself, but also to the certainty wrapped around it. Now consider emotional reasoning, one of the most powerful drivers of false confidence. Emotional reasoning happens when someone interprets reality through the lens of their feelings. If something feels true, the brain treats it as true. If something feels false, the brain treats it as suspicious. This isn't logical, but it's deeply human. When people have strong emotional reactions to a topic, fear, anger, nostalgia, hope, those emotions color their interpretation. And because emotions are immediate and intense, they often override slower, more careful reasoning. A person may say, "I just know," but what they really mean is, "I have a strong emotional response, and my brain is interpreting that as certainty." Emotional certainty is powerful because it's connected to the same systems that regulate survival instincts. When our brain tags something as emotionally important, it gives that thought extra weight. We become more confident in it, even when the reasoning behind it is thin. This is why emotional debates escalate. Both sides feel their perspective has the weight of truth behind it. Another factor at play is narrative coherence. Humans are natural storytellers. We build narratives to make sense of the world. And once a narrative feels coherent, even if it's incorrect, we become attached to it. The smoother the story flows, the more true it feels. The moment you disrupt the story, confidence collapses. This is why people resist information that contradicts their personal narrative. They're not only defending facts, they're defending a storyline that helps structure their identity. And when someone pokes holes in that storyline, the brain doesn't respond with curiosity, it responds with defensiveness. It tries to protect the narrative by strengthening confidence. Now let's talk about something genuinely universal. Everyone, no matter how intelligent, educated, or self-aware, has blind spots. We all have areas where our confidence outruns our accuracy. Sometimes it's harmless, like thinking we're great multitaskers when the brain can't actually multitask. But sometimes it affects major decisions. The key skill isn't eliminating blind spots. That's impossible. The key is learning to notice when your confidence is rising faster than your understanding. And here's where the core idea emerges. Accuracy and confidence are completely separate systems in the brain. They're related, but they're not synchronized. Confidence is based on feeling. Accuracy is based on correctness. When those systems fall out of alignment, you get the very human phenomenon of being absolutely certain and absolutely mistaken at the same time. So, what can we realistically do to reduce the gap between confidence and accuracy? One strategy is stress testing your beliefs. Ask yourself whether your viewpoint would hold up if someone asked you to explain it precisely step by step. Another strategy is recalibrating confidence. Instead of assuming certainty, assume probability. Say, I'm pretty sure, instead of I know. This small shift softens your internal narrative and gives your brain room to update. You can also practice informational diversity. Surrounding yourself with only people who think like you makes confidence inflate unnaturally. Exposing yourself to differing viewpoints doesn't mean adopting them, but it keeps your certainty honest. It reduces the illusion that your beliefs are universally held. Finally, there's the strategy of intentional doubt, a gentle, productive form of skepticism. Not skepticism in the cynical sense, but skepticism as a mental habit of asking, is there something I might be missing? This question doesn't weaken your thinking, it strengthens it. It turns your brain from a defender of beliefs into an investigator of reality. By understanding why people are so confident when they're wrong, we're not just learning about the flaws in others, we're learning about the architecture of our own minds. These mechanisms are not bugs, they're features built for survival. But now that we live in a world that demands accuracy more than instinct, understanding these features becomes a form of mental evolution. The better we understand ourselves, the better decisions we make, and the less likely we are to fall in love with our own wrongness. There's a final angle we need to explore to complete the picture, the role of uncertainty in modern life. Our ancestors lived in a world where uncertainty usually meant danger. If you didn't know whether the sound in the bushes was a predator, you assumed the worst. If you weren't sure which plants were safe to eat, hesitation could save your life. Certainty wasn't just comfortable, it was necessary. But today, uncertainty is everywhere and rarely deadly. The world has become more complex than the simple instinct of confident equals safe. We face topics that require nuance, analysis, and multiple layers of understanding. Yet our brains are still running the old software, the version designed for quick judgments, fast decisions, and automatic confidence. This mismatch between ancient instincts and modern complexity creates a lot of the problems we see today. People want quick answers to complicated questions. They want clarity where the truth is subtle. They want certainty where uncertainty is normal. And when that clarity doesn't exist, they generate it themselves. That's where confident mistakes thrive. The discomfort of not knowing pushes people to adopt the first explanation that feels satisfying, even if it's not grounded in reality. The moment that explanation feels right, the dopamine reward kicks in and the confidence locks in. Meanwhile, more accurate but complicated explanations get ignored because they don't offer that same quick emotional payoff. This brings us to something incredibly practical, recognizing the difference between clarity and accuracy. Clear explanations feel good, but they aren't always true. Accurate explanations might feel messy, incomplete, or confusing at first. Learning to tolerate that discomfort is part of intellectual maturity. It's part of being effective in a world that rarely gives us simple answers. Another concept worth understanding is belief perseverance. This is the tendency for people to stick to their beliefs even after the evidence that formed those beliefs has disappeared. Once a belief takes root, it develops its own emotional and cognitive scaffolding. Even when the original reasoning is gone, the confidence stays. It's like building a house on a foundation and then removing the foundation, but still expecting the house to stand. The structure remains because the mind has invested in it. Belief perseverance is why outdated ideas persist long after they've been debunked. It's why people cling to first impressions even after getting new information. It's why confidence often survives long past the point where accuracy has moved on. The belief becomes self-sustaining, the confidence becomes self-reinforcing, and the original truth becomes irrelevant. This brings us to a powerful realization. Confidence is a feeling, not a fact. It comes from internal cues, emotional signals, cognitive shortcuts, social rewards, not from whether the belief is actually correct. This separation between internal conviction and external accuracy is the core reason why humans can be so confidently wrong. But understanding this gives us an incredible advantage. When you can separate the feeling of certainty from the truth of the situation, you gain control over your thinking. You learn to recognize the emotional signals that create false confidence. You learn to challenge your own assumptions. You learn to pause before doubling down. And this awareness doesn't just make you more accurate, it makes you more resilient. It allows you to navigate disagreements without taking them personally. It allows you to update your beliefs without feeling threatened. It allows you to grow rather than defend. Now let's bring everything together. Throughout life, we rely on mental shortcuts that served our ancestors well but mislead us in modern environments. We rely on memory that feels reliable but is constantly being reshaped. We rely on intuition that arrives quickly but isn't always correct. We rely on social structures that reward confidence more than accuracy. We rely on emotional reasoning that prioritizes feelings over evidence. All of this creates a world where confidence is abundant and accuracy is optional. But the good news is that awareness is transformative. The moment you start noticing these mechanisms, you become less susceptible to them. You start asking better questions. You start recognizing when someone's confidence is coming from emotion or identity rather than expertise. You start adjusting your own certainty when the situation calls for it. And here's the most interesting part. Being open to being wrong doesn't weaken your intelligence, it strengthens it. People who can say, I might be mistaken, or let me think this through, or I want to learn more about this, tend to make far better decisions. They update their beliefs faster, they avoid doubling down on errors, they grow instead of getting stuck. Confidence becomes healthier when it's calibrated instead of inflated. Instead of trying to be right all the time, the goal becomes understanding as clearly as possible. Instead of defending beliefs, the goal becomes improving them. Instead of treating mistakes as threats, you treat them as invitations. In a world full of opinions, assumptions, and strong personalities, recognizing the limits of your own certainty becomes a superpower. It helps you think more clearly, communicate more effectively, and avoid falling into the traps that make people stubbornly, passionately, unshakably wrong. And in the end, all of this leads to one conclusion. Confidence isn't the enemy, it's necessary. It keeps us moving, making decisions, taking action. But confidence without awareness becomes a trap. Confidence without humility becomes a barrier. Confidence without curiosity becomes the reason people stop learning. The more we understand about how our mind constructs certainty, the more we can align our confidence with reality. Not by eliminating mistakes, but by recognizing them faster. Not by avoiding doubt, but by using it productively. Not by trying to be right, but by trying to understand. And that's the real takeaway. True intelligence isn't just about knowing things, it's about noticing when you don't. It's about keeping your certainty flexible, your curiosity alive, and your humility intact. Because when confidence and accuracy finally start working together instead of fighting each other, that's when our thinking becomes truly powerful.